Pamplin Historical Park is very significant historically for a number of reasons. There were a couple of engagements that occurred on the ground, but I think it's best known for what happened there on the morning of April 2nd, 1865. Following the Battle of Five Forks, General Grant understood that the Confederates were spread out so thinly that it was possible to launch a frontal attack, something he hadn't tried since July of 1864. And he launched a number of assaults against the Confederate line, but the place that broke through first was what is now Pamplin Historical Park, the Union Sixth Corps. And they broke through what is a spectacular line of preserved Confederate works. So from an engineering standpoint, the park is really important. But for what happened on April 2nd, 1865, it is a premier historic site. One of the unique things about Pamplin Historical Park, and it's a good thing and there was a potential downside, was that it was wholly owned by the Pamplin Foundation. And Bob Pamplin was the philanthropist behind this. Certainly we raised some of our own money, but Dr. Pamplin contributed $43 million to the construction and operation of that park, but it was always in a closely held foundation. No government involved, and so the question was, what was going to be the ultimate fate of the park? As long as Dr. Pamplin was willing to underwrite the park, we were in great shape. But everybody's human, things happen, people die, and so there was always in the back of my mind a concern about what the ultimate fate of the park might be. I could not be happier about what has transpired with the American Battlefield Trust and Pamplin Historical Park. I didn't know of any other nonprofit organization that had the chops to do what the American Battlefield Trust has done. So this is probably the ultimate perfect outcome for the long-term fate of Pamplin Historical Park. I have spent the majority of my public history career on the Petersburg battlefields. I started with the National Park Service at Petersburg National Battlefield, and then of course came back and spent the next 22 years at Pamplin Historical Park at Petersburg. And I thought, Petersburg was never really well documented by modern historians. And I undertook this seemingly never-ending project of writing an operational history of the Petersburg Campaign. I've got 2 volumes done, I got 1 more to go. But no one had really ever done that before. And the thing about Petersburg is it's a gigantic campaign, covers more than 500 square miles, but there's so much of it that is left. And when I think about 1995 and what little had been preserved outside of the National Park Service, and fast forward to 2025 and seeing all of the preservation that has come about with the American Battlefield Trust, with Pamplin Historical Park, and with some other organizations, the Petersburg Battlefield Foundation now is active. Petersburg is kind of the last frontier of the big Civil War sites. One of the wonderful things that happened while I was the director at Pamplin Historical Park was working with the American Battlefield Trust to preserve a large portion of the land over which the battle was fought, and connecting all the way to the Union fortifications, which are owned by the National Park Service. Going back to the 1920s, when Petersburg National Military Park, as it was known then, was established, it was established on the Antietam Plan. And in other words, they bought just the lines of the fortifications, and that's it. And the land between the Union lines and the Confederate lines were subject to development. So with the American Battlefield Trust coming in and purchasing that property, visitors now have the opportunity, and it's certainly unusual, I hate to use the term unique, but it might be actually unique in traversing from the Union line to the Confederate line, going through 3 different ownerships, 3 different preservation organizations, the National Park Service, the American Battlefield Trust, and Pamplin Historical Park, to present a seamless experience in one of the most important battles of the entire Civil War. I could not in my wildest dreams have imagined back in 1987 in my living room when seven clueless historians got together and said, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore. Let's form a nonprofit organization and buy Civil War land. We didn't know what we were doing. And we thought that maybe, I don't even know what we thought. I could not have imagined that, how many years later, 38 years later, that the American Battlefield Trust has tens of thousands of members, has preserved thousands and thousands of acres, has become, in my view, the premier Civil War education organization in the country, and does all sorts of programs and is still vital, not only with Civil War sites, but with Revolutionary War sites, War of 1812 sites. I could not have imagined the success. And I guess we take a little bit of pride in starting this organization, but I would be lying if I thought it would ever get as big and successful as it is today. I can't think of a better partner to make this happen than the American Battlefield Trust.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. Get inspired at battlefields.org.